Oh, Jason. So the Joint Capabilities Integration and Development System, like kindergarten level Crayola crayons, right? Let's take this
For
back to
brains, yeah.
integer men by trade. All right. So think about it this way, right? Like, why does the government, why does the military buy stuff, right? Like, they don't just come up with the idea off the cuff, right? So the way this works is like the president says, this is what we're going to do. They set that down in policy, like the National Defense Strategy. It's a strategy document, right? It says we're going to do this stuff. Here's our priorities. Very big, broad, defend against China. So that turns into a national defense strategy, right? National security strategy, national defense strategy. And that kind of says more granularly at the Pentagon level, like, these are the things we need to do so that we can support the president, right? So that's what kind of lays that down, right? So the National Defense Strategy, again, pretty broad, open document. That then goes down to the services, right? So Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Special Operations Command, they have to go, okay, this is what the Pentagon's doing. What do we need to do to support that? That's how that whole like chain comes down. And so when the services do that, they look at what do we have, right? How many aircraft carriers do we have? How many jets do we have? Can we do things in a VDIL communications denied environment? Are we prepared for Ukraine? All those things, right? And when they do that, they do a bunch of processes internally. But at the end of the day, they go, here's what they say we need to do what the president wants. And here's what we have. And somewhere in the middle, there's a gap. And that gap usually turns into requirements, right? 82nd Airborne says, hey, we need to be able to fight in China, in the South China Sea or whatever. And they say, hey, we can't swim to shore. We need some like life rafts or something, right? So there's gaps that get identified. Usually that gets identified by forces towards the edge. Sometimes like the folks who actually write those requirements are usually closer to the edge, usually closer to the formations, oftentimes in training doctrine organizations. But they say, hey, we need to do this. We don't have these material capabilities. So they write these documents, like capability development documents. It's like a formal thing that says, hey, we need to be able to swim. We don't have life rafts. So we need to develop these life rafts that can do this and they can survive choppy seas. And all that stuff then goes into the JCIDS process. It's this long, drawn-out process that goes from the very nascent, hey, we need life rafts, all the way through this like long procedural process to validate and develop and test and evaluate and build the budget lines for those things so they actually get created and set up, right? This is process, as it's called now, is 20 years long, 20 years old. I think it formally came into place in 2003. But really the underpinnings of the system have been around since McNamara in the 70s. So the underpinnings have been around for quite a while. Big blame game, right? Everyone blames JCIDS because they can't get the cool stuff that they want. It's a bit of a whipping boy, I'd say, in the acquisition community. But that's the big macro, right? It's a long process to make sure that we buy the right stuff to give forces what they need so that they can satisfy the mission that the president has given them. In layman's terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So who do I blame for not getting money?
Money's a totally different thing, dude. So there's actually 3 different pieces to this pie and they don't really fit together all that well. So there's the JCIDS process that creates requirements. And then there's the PPB&E process, right? The planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process, which is tied in with the JCIDS process, right? They're co-aligned. And then there's the actual defense acquisition system, the DAS, that buys this stuff. So you have requirements that creates budget, and that then gets spent on acquiring stuff. There's a bunch of different people to blame depending on who you are and what you're trying to sell.
Love it. So we'll dive into the reform here in a second. Dave, bring us up to speed on, give us a little bit of flavor around what did JCIDS do well? Where did it work really well? What was it good for? And what were some of the biggest, aside from the speed, what were some of the biggest detraction points from the process?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And just throwing it back out there in pure private capacity, not as part of the United States government or any military organization, right? So what JCIDS does well, when you have that JCIDS compliant document, that's called a requirement document or a requirement. And we all get caught up like, hey, there's no requirement for that. And really what we mean is that approved document. And I say, what is that approved document? And so it's around, it keeps changing, right? But it's around 30 pages. It says words, cost, schedule, performance. And a lot of those words we can just get rid of because no one cares except for right up front. And then it says cost, the cost of one item multiplied by the costs of all items, plus some sustainment and the care and feeding of that program or record, right? And so if you're an Army and you're an Army brigade, and let's say you need 4 or 5 or 10 per Army brigade, whatever is that thing, that gun and knife or bomb or whatever, right? That means that's 1 or 5 or 10 times all the Army brigades. That's around 150. That's a lot. And generally the stuff we buy is pretty expensive. And so it's a little bit like your family budget. You take out a mortgage and you're going to finance that thing for 30 years. And once you sign up for it, you've stuck with it, right? You got your mortgage forever, or you're going to sell your house and move. Pretty big muscle movement to walk away from your mortgage. And as John said, that money comes together and it comes down. It came down to buy those 10 times 150 things over 5 or 10 years. And that document laid in what those things should look like, right? So where's cost as performance? Cost is the price of one times the price of all laid out through the years. And then the schedule is the number of years. And then the performance, we get into the thresholds and objectives or KPPs and KSAs, but really the features and functionality. What do you want it to do? It's a sniper rifle. It's got to shoot a long ways accurately. If it doesn't do that, I don't want it. Everything else becomes trade space, like how heavy it weighs, how long it is. Does it come with a cool bag or a box? We can waive all that. And as John said, the JCIDS process gets a bad name. Most of what I just said on a sniper rifle or whatever the item is waivable. Gun, shoot long way, accurate. After that, it's all trade space. It can all change. And that's where people don't understand that requirement document, it's got to get signed to get the money because the money is laid inside the document. And then who is responsible for you not having any money to your company? That's whoever spent up the entire budget. Just like your family budget, your mortgage, your car payment, health care, savings, whatever it is, once it's all gone, it's gone. And there is no more money. And so unless you want to cut your mortgage for your car payment, your dance lessons for your kid or something, there's just nothing left. And so you really do have to throw a body out in the hall to get something new. And so what are you going to do?
So help me understand, sometimes I can be a dumb Marine. Is every single item, like from the pencils I got, when, in my green notebooks when I was in the Marine Corps going through this process, the tanks that the Marine Corps used to have and got rid of, the sniper rifles that the Marines had, the M16s, the M4s, or how do I think about thresholds related to JCIDS and what we're at?
That's a good question. If it needs something across a lot of years and it needs some kind of logistics system specialized to maintain it, it probably has some kind of program or record. If it's a gun, a knife, a bomb, anything explodes or touches a network or talks on the radio, it's probably a program or record. And then we have different categories, acquisition categories. And so you get to the big tanks and the battleships and the airplanes. That's like an ACAT-1. And that's how important it is or how joint it is or how much money it is. And then you get all the way down to ACAT-3 and 4, which is smaller things like a small scope on a rifle. They all have that same document, but the document's just not that hard for a scope as it might be for an entire tank with 500 subsystems. What's more important is not, is it a program of record or not? It's how does it flow through? I call it the 4 mountains. Anything that you buy, whether it's a pencil or a tank, has to satisfy 4 requirements. And the government person has to climb these 4 mountains: requirement, contract, funding, and priority. And so it doesn't matter if it's a pencil or a chainsaw or a tank. There's still someone saying, I have a requirement. Someone's agreeing with that. There's still got to be some kind of contract to get it, whether you're buying it on a credit card swipe downtown at Lowe's or you're doing it through the big, nasty acquisition system. And then you got to have funding. And then what's the priority of it all? Requirement, contract, priority.